Great. So look, welcome everybody. We'll get moving. This is the first of our Symphony 3 webinars in 2020. Actually, I'm delighted to have Stephen here, who you can see in the other screen there. Welcome, Stephen.
Delighted to be here. Thanks, Barrett.
Excited to hear about how we'll learn to unlearn. Just while we've got people coming in, we'll probably have people streaming in for the next minute or two. I just thought I'll run through a little bit of housekeeping for people in terms of the format that we're going to run today. So we'll run a conversation and presentation with Stephen for about 45 minutes. We'll probably do a bit of presenting, or largely presentation, because there's a lot of material for Stephen to get through that he wants to, I guess, share with people. But we will try and leave 10 to 15 minutes at the end for questions. This will be pretty informal to a certain degree, so please pop your questions into the Q&A box or the chat box. I'll pick them up. We've also got Eamon Dooley here to help us, and we'll filter them through as questions to Stephen, either during the session or as we go. We'll also have a little bit of interactivity, so we've got some polls to run with you guys. And Stephen's got a really nice tool called menti.com. So if you've got your smartphone ready, just open up the browser and type in menti.com, and then you'll be ready to go when Stephen gives us some instructions later on. We've put everybody other than Stephen and myself on mute, just in the interests of trying to have as little distractions as possible in terms of dogs barking and buses driving by. And finally, this session has been recorded, so we'll make it available on our website and YouTube and social media afterwards. So no stress if you have to get off to another meeting. We'll make the recording available to everybody. So hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully everyone's joined us. Just want to give a shout out and a welcome to, I guess, to our clients, people who know us. So thank you very much for joining, and hopefully you'll find today's session of value. To those of you don't sort of come across us on social media and thought this would be an interesting session to join, I just thought I'd set a little bit of context. So in terms of our business, Symphony 3, we're trusted digital advisors to our clients, and our purpose is really to help our clients deliver simple, connected customer experiences. So we like to think of ourselves as a smart glue for our clients. We help you connect your customers to services, connect your information, connect your systems. And really that's all about digital transformation. I guess in the context of today, normally when we start our digital transformation engagements or projects related to digital transformation, people are ready for change. They've had to think about what they need to do culturally often. But of course, this is a big challenge, which brings us to today's session. And how do we prepare people for change? Of course, with COVID-19, I'm sure Stephen will talk about this going on. We've seen quite a degree of change already. And the question is, I suppose, will people go back to the old ways? I picked this quote up off social media from one of the Atlassian guys, Stephen, last week on social media. And I thought it was maybe a good way to start. And his quoted was, as leaders, we need to fight the idea that the world should go back to the way it was. What it was is a known state. But charting a path back to a known state isn't leadership. We need to chart a course to a new state, and that requires a bunch of thinking, dreaming, and changing. And of course, we need some frameworks to help us do this. So I'm delighted to have Stephen here and giving up his time for us. Stephen is the guru of Unlearn here in Australia. I'm going to let you do your own intros, Stephen. What I might do is hand over to you now, and maybe we'll change slides while we're at it.
Great, thanks, Fergal. Yeah, no, I'll pull up mine. Just 1 second. Okay, hopefully everybody sees that. Yeah, I love that quote that you just shared there, Fergal, with Atlassian. Like, I think in the world, I think you struggle to find a better company in terms of that kind of forward thinking. And I'm a huge fan of Atlassian. I follow them really closely in terms of what they're doing. So what I wanted to do maybe is just, again, to give people on the call a little bit of a background of what I do and what ETM does. We're passionate educators, simplifiers, helping organizations to thrive in a fast changing world. We've been going since I've been here in Australia, probably about 9 years now. And what's pretty interesting, I believe, is we've gone through sort of 3 evolutions of what I believed was the most important thing that I needed to focus on, which if I wanted to bring sort of impact and value to my clients. When I started off 9 years ago, I'd sort of come from being a heavy duty project manager, managing really big transformational stuff. I realized how important project delivery was to help, you know, clients or organizations achieve outcomes. And I said, okay, what I want to do is, I believe if I become a thought leader in the project management space, I will be able to help my clients to be able to sort of deliver value quickly and fast. And my big focus was all about being, you know, absolutely top of the tree in terms of teaching people about project management. And I believe I got there. I was seen as a sort of a thought leader in this space.
And just for the context, Stephen, I mean, you've done this in the financial sector, mid-market sector, so across a whole range of industries and with both large and small clients.
Absolutely, Fergal. Lots of different types of projects that I had. So yeah, really, really broad range. And then what happened was, I remember people were talking about all this agile lean world. And I said, oh, I've got to get my head around this. And there was one of the top, what it was called, the agile transformationalists in the world. And he was coming to Melbourne running a course. And I went to this course, and I'm not kidding you, he basically blew up my world completely, because I realized that there was a lot of stuff that I've been doing. There was a big gap in what I was doing. And then that then brought on the second evolution of ETM, because then what my belief was, there was a better way of doing things, delivering outcomes. And then I said, okay, now I've got to become a thought leader in the agile lean systems thinking space. I could see why this now was so important. And just 2 weeks ago, I got selected for Agile Australia, which I don't know if anybody on the call, if they're familiar with the Agile world, that is really hard to do, because they get like 300 people and they only get about 20 people. So I feel like I sort of arrived there. But then, which was good. And then the last sort of iteration of what I'm doing now, which really was the start of this year, which is where I was looking at what was happening in the Agile world and looking at why they weren't getting as much traction as they should have been getting, because a lot of this stuff made sense. And then what I realized was there was a big challenge here around helping people to sort of shift from old ways of thinking to new ways of thinking. And this is really what we're going to be talking about today. But now my big focus is supporting organizations and people unlearning the past. And then once we do that, then that really helps to drive agility into organizations. So that's really, you know, the journey that I've been going on. Now, I want to start with sort of asking a question of everybody that's on the session here. And the question I want to ask is, what do you think a leader's biggest limiting factor is? Now, it's a big question, and, you know, and obviously depending upon the situation and the context, people can argue about what that is. But I've got a hypothesis. And my hypothesis that I believe a really big one for all leaders is their ability to unlearn the past. And I believe this becomes even more important the further up the food chain you go. And this is really what we're going to explore over the course of sort of this session that we'll go off.
So we just have one person there saying resistance to change, but you know, this all drives into what we're going to talk about, Steve.
Absolutely. And this again, so we'll tease this out as we go. People on the call again might be familiar with this great book that came out by Peter Senge, called The Fifth Discipline. It came out in the 1990s, early 1990s. And ever since this book came out, everybody started talking about learning organizations. We have to enable learning organizations. And to me, I bet you there's nobody on the call that's not working for a learning organization, or one that they want to be a learning organization. Because to me, learning is a given. We've got to continually learn new things. The world is changing, and if you want to be able to adapt, you've got to be able to learn new things. Now, around the same time, or a bit before this, there was another term that people were talking about, but it didn't really make it into the headlines. It was the term of unlearning. And the first time we came across this from an organizational context was in this piece of work that was done by this guy called Bo Hedberg. And he basically said, knowledge grows and simultaneously it becomes obsolete as reality changes. Understanding involves both learning new knowledge and discarding obsolete and misleading knowledge. So when it comes, we've got to be very careful. We've got to learn new things, but then we've got to be able to recognize when things become obsolete, and we've got to be able to let them go. Now, a really good example, I think, of this is in the medical sort of industry. And back in the 1980s, the consensus was that knowledge was doubling every 30 years. If you go fast forward to the present day, they reckon knowledge is doubling every 5 years. Now think about the impact of that on new doctors coming out. That means that new doctors coming out, they're going to, over the course of their whole career, they're going to have to unlearn and relearn 50% of their knowledge, probably 5 or 6 times, if they want to make sure that they stay relevant. And, you know, and there was a great story I heard recently, and it was a story about Einstein. And Einstein went over to teach over in Princeton, over in the US. And when it came around to exam time one year, he had to give he was going to give his paper to all of the students. And his assistant said, "Oh, have you got the paper?" And he said, "Oh, yes, here it is." And he gave the paper to the assistant, and the assistant took a look at it. And he said, "Excuse me, Mr. Einstein, isn't this the same paper that you gave to your students last year?" And he said, yes, it is. And the student sort of looked puzzled, and he says, how can you give them the same exam, the exact same exam that you did last year? And then Einstein said, "The questions may be the same, but the answers have changed." And this is the thing that we've got to be really, really careful about. You know, knowledge that we all have this kind of sunk cost fallacy in our knowledge and our skills that we have, because it's taken us a while to get them. But then if we've got to be really careful, because if they suddenly become obsolete, what has made you successful in the past could be the thing that trips you up.
I think one of the things there, Stephen, that we find even in organizations we go into that are traditional organizations, you know, people think that it's IT, for example, in the organization that are at the cutting edge. But
Yeah.
As a matter of fact, one of the most disrupted departments by technology is the technology department. It's changing that fast. And you know, we see a lot of departments where IT departments where the skills are actually outdated and aren't coping and keeping up. So you're absolutely spot on.
Yeah. And it's just, so absolutely. No, really, really important. So then we talk about, well, what is unlearning? How do we define it? And there was a great book that came out by a guy called Barry O'Reilly at the back end of 2018. And this is the way Barry defines this word unlearning. He said, unlearning is the process of letting go, reframing, and moving away from once useful mindsets and acquired behaviors that were effective in the past, but now limit our success. It's not forgetting, removing, or discarding knowledge or experience. It's the conscious act of letting go of outdated information and actively engaging in taking in new information to inform effective decision-making and action. Now, one of the ways that I like to try and explain this for people is, like, I've got my water bottle here. People can see it. And to me, all of us are like this kind of water bottle. This is our kind of, you know, our mindset, our beliefs around how we should do things, the knowledge and the skills that we have. And when it comes to learning new things, you can't just layer new things on top of things that are outdated or obsolete. You have to, first of all, be willing to let go of some things to be able to learn new things if they're fundamentally different. And this why to me is why unlearning is so important. You've got to be able to let go of this stuff, because otherwise you're basically trying to map it on top of old stuff, which if there's a fundamental conflict, there's a big problem there. And to me, this is the thing, you know, like that, you've got to be open to, you know, unlearning old stuff and then be open to relearning new stuff.
It's very Zen, Stephen.
Yeah, yeah. But and there's, I think we talked about that before, Fergal, didn't we? That parable, there's a great parable of a wise Zen master. And, you know, this young pup of a student comes, you know, and wants to learn from this wise Zen master. And he comes and you know, they get introduced, and it becomes pretty obvious that the young student, you know, is full of his ideas, and he won't shut up. He won't let the master speak. And then the master sort of pauses and he said, okay, just hang on a minute here, everybody. Or let's just have a cup of tea. So they start having a cup of tea, and he pours the tea for the student, and he fills the cup, and then the cup fills up, and then he keeps pouring, and then the tea goes onto the table, and he keeps pouring, and then it sort of goes onto the robe of the student, and the student jumps up and says, master, can you not see the cup is full? And the wise master just smiles at him. He says, exactly, you are this cup. Come back here when you have an empty cup. And again, it's the same idea. If we all have this fixed mindset around, I know it, and you're not open to letting stuff in, then we've got a problem. So what have we unlearned lately? Now, the really good news here is I will argue that as humans, we do this already. This is not new. We unlearn all the time. Like, to me, the human being is the apex predator. We're the ones that are the ones in the whole world that are able to adapt. And when you look at the kind of world that we've been living in now under the coronavirus, I'm looking around and I'm seeing truckloads of unlearning happening. Like, you think about, you know, how are people interacting? How are we working? You know, and you just look at sort of, you know, and the big one that of course comes immediately to mind is, you know, that if you think of before coronavirus, you know, I'm sure there was every executive in the world probably has a mindset that says, well, if we want to get our work done, then people have to be in the office more or less. Then you look at what's happened now, and that's a belief that's been shattered, because lo and behold, when people couldn't go into the office, wheels kept turning and we get the work done. And
found a way, you know, you're hearing about kind of, you know, gym companies that are making sanitizer and things like that just to survive and get on, and it's forcing them to think real hard. Absolutely.
And this is the thing. So to me, you know, we do this, and, you know, and again, you know, I think the big thing here, like in it's what's happened, and I just think this is a really great opportunity for people, is we've been forced into doing it. Because we've had no choice. So we've had to move, and we've had to shift our mindset because there was no option. But the thing about it is like, normally, I will argue that unlearning is hard to do. And why is it hard to do? And to me, it comes back to the way that we're all naturally wired. And, you know, we all have a brain. I'm sure everybody on the call has a brain. And this brain that we all have is really wired for two things. First and foremost, it's wired, first of all, to keep you alive. And then the second thing is it's wired for efficiency. So a lot of the time now, we don't even realize it, but we operate on autopilot most of the time. So your behaviors that you do, I think the latest thinking or the latest research I've seen in neuroscience is they reckon we operate on autopilot probably 95 to 97% of the time. So we have all these pre-response patterns of how we react to things. So we think we're in control, but a lot of the times we're not. And to me, this is the thing. This is why it's a challenge, because if we're not in a COVID scenario, then trying to relearn is not something that is automatic. It's something that we've got to fight against, those kind of that normal pre-response patterns that happen for what we're doing. Now, one of the things that we wanted to do is, and like Fergal said at the start, is we wanted to use this Menti tool to just get a sense from people on the call around. So if you go, hopefully you pulled it up on your browser, there's a code here that we just want you to punch in. Now there's no space, so it's just 886224. And there's a question that will come up there is, what do you think are your biggest obstacles preventing you from unlearning the past? So again, this is just free format. Just what are those things that you think are stopping you from unlearning the past? So if you wouldn't mind, and you can put in more than one.
You'll show On the screen there, will you?
Yeah, I'll show it on the screen. Just give me
What
one
was the
second.
code there, Phil? Sorry, 88.
Yeah, I'll put it in here again. I'll just give me one sec. So yeah, there's the code should be there, 886224.
Okay. Right, so people are starting to put in their words, their colleagues. Oh,
Yeah. Culture, risk, yeah. And obviously, as people put in the same words, the bigger the things they become, they start getting bigger. Fear.
Yeah. So fear, yeah, fear of change. Right, yeah. So stubbornness, through refusal to change.
Yeah. Love it.
Great.
Excellent, excellent. So no, really good. Thank you for doing that. That's great.
Culture is another one. Okay,
Culture, so yeah, fear, risk, yeah.
Fear, risk.
Time, value in the past, existing org structures, yeah. Some really good information coming out here. So there is these kind of things that are stopping us, preventing us, hindering us. Okay, I'll kill it here, otherwise we keep, but thank you for that. And we'll share this, Fergal, won't we, with
I'll make all this information available to people.
Yeah. So let me just go back to my slides. So this is where, you know, so if we recognize that, you know, unlearning is something that is not going to be automatic. It's something that is, you know, if we're not in a COVID scenario, we need something that can help us to unlearn. And Barry O'Reilly, in that book that I talked about, he has this, what he calls this cycle of unlearning, which is a system to help you to be able to do this on a much more conscious and a much more deliberate basis. So what is it? It's a 3-step process. So the first step is the very top one here, unlearn. So the first thing that we've got to do is we've got to recognize when and what do we need to unlearn. So we've got to be open, we've got to be curious, and we've got to be willing to do it, to be willing to let go of something. So if something's not working for us, and typically, you know, a really good questions to ask yourself to say, well, do I need to unlearn something? Is if you ask yourself the question, you know, where am I not achieving my expectations? Where am I not achieving the outcomes that I want? And if in those things where you're not doing that, then that's probably a warning sign that you need to unlearn something. Because if your beliefs and your mindset and your behaviors were working, does everybody see that that would be enabling you to achieve those expectations and those outcomes that you're doing? So the idea is, so step one is we've got to recognize we need to unlearn something. Then the second step is where now if something's not working, then we've got to try and find out a new way of how we're going to, you know, do what's that new way of doing things. And what we've got to see ourselves, everybody has to see yourself as an experimenter, because what we're going to do here in this relearn step is we need to design a little behavior experiment for ourselves. So if we don't think our behaviors aren't working, we've got to find a new behavior that can help us to be, that we think can help us to move to whatever outcome that we're aiming for. So the idea is we design a little experiment for ourselves, a little small, and it's very important that it needs to be small. And then when we go to the breakthrough step, this is where we execute the experiment, we do it, and we see what the result is. And if it's something we've done that's small, and if it's moving us to where we want to go, then we will amplify it. If it's something that hasn't helped, then obviously we need to go back around that cycle again. And the idea is, yeah, sorry, Fergal.
Can I just, sorry to interrupt again. Is this, so are you recommending that people start as individuals first over a group? You know, so you've got a CEO and a business, does it have to start with them doing something individual, or as a group?
Yeah, no, very good point, Fergal. I think, you know, when we start to try to do this, there's different levels of unlearning. And to me, it has to start with the individual. So you've got to start showing, if you're a leader, to me, it's very important that you model the behaviors that you want other people to do. So to me, it's really important that you start to try and do this and show people that you're open to letting go of the past. Say, okay, this is not where we're not getting to the outcome that we want. We've got to be open to trying something new. And as a senior leader, I show courage by trying to do something different. And when we do this relearn step, you're going to be a beginner again. So you're not going to be an expert. So you've got to be open and you've got to be willing to try something and be ready to learn from it. But you're right, Fergal, it's very important that this starts, to me, at an individual level. So if you're trying to scale the pattern of thinking or the system of unlearning in an organization, it's got to start at the individual level first. And then once individuals start doing it, then you can get clusters or teams doing it, then groups, and then you can build it and get it into an organization. But it's a really good question. It's got to start at the individual level. Yeah. You know, and you know, like here, you know, as an example, like I look at myself now, and I think of, you know, for this presentation, one of the things, I did a communications course last week. And one of the things I'm trying to do is just put more pauses into my sessions. So again, this is one of the little behavior experiments I'm trying to do now with what I'm trying to do here. And again, I
thought you'd forgotten what you were talking about there for a second. You stopped for so long.
No, but this, and the whole idea here is that we need something to support us, to help us to do it. And, you know, this is a simple 3-step process, but simple is not the same as easy. So, but the idea is that if we start to do this and apply this system, the more you do it, the more consistent, the more repeatable you'll do it. And obviously what we're aiming for is we've got to build habits. That's how we're going to have these automatic ways of behaving. So the idea is that this becomes more of a habit for how you use it. Okay.
Have we any questions coming through there that anyone wants to ask at this stage, or will we keep going? And we're halfway through, so we're 12:27, so I think we're making good time, Stephen.
Yeah. Okay. Good stuff. So why is unlearning so important now? You know,
sorry, just a quick, Neil. Sorry if I've missed it, but can you give an example, a real world example of, I guess, learning and unlearning potentially in a work context, I guess.
So yeah, like, you know, take myself as a moment now. Like, you know, in March, you know, when you look at how I've been running workshops,
yeah,
you know, obviously all of my workshops got cancelled, my face-to-face workshops. So now everything that I've been doing has been designing sort of the same, trying to give the same learning experience to people, but in a virtual context. Yeah. So all of what I've been doing is just, you know, forgetting about that old way and then changing the way that I'm doing and I'm delivering stuff. And it's absolutely fascinating because I'm seeing how I can have probably, like, we ran a course with one of my biggest clients, NAB. We ran a new virtual program. We designed a brand new virtual program off the back of an existing one we were doing. And we just got the feedback in from everybody. And the scores were similar, if not maybe even a slightly better than what we had done in the past, because we'd broken the session into 2 sessions rather than 1 session, give it in bite-sized chunks. We blended in different types of content. So, you know, to me, that was just like a really good real life example, because my business is going down the tube if I couldn't do that. So hopefully, is that, Fergal? Yeah,
I think so. Yeah, like we'll get into some more detail. I mean, even in another context, you mentioned, you gave me an example when we spoke last week about, you know, somebody who wanted to improve the communication with their direct reports. And one of the things they did was they started to have the meetings at the desk of the, you know, of the report, as opposed to them coming to their office, and that changed the dynamic.
Yeah, absolutely. Anything you can do, just trying to change the way. So if you're a senior executive, and you're absolutely right, like, and how they get their information, people used to give them a report. So change the way that they get that information. So instead of getting that, they go down to the people, have a look at what's happening. Maybe they have a visualization board, ask questions and get information. So, yeah.
There's a few more questions, but we'll keep going. I'll hold off some of these till the end if we can, if that's in the interest of time.
So why is unlearning so important now? what's our current reality? What's the current reality that we're living in? The first one I want to talk about is the technology reality. And, people look at COVID, and people have explained it out. They see it as a disruptor. I don't think it's a disruptor. I see COVID as an accelerant, because when you look at what's happening, and there's a great quote from Satya from Microsoft, where he said he'd seen 3 years of digital transformation in 3 months. And, and the thing is, this is only the tip of it. When you look, and I'm sure a lot of people on the call are probably familiar with a lot of these different exponential technologies, and you look at, the guy on the little fishing boat here, the impact of this digital wave that's coming at everybody is absolutely phenomenal. You look at each one of these exponential technologies, and in their own right, they're pretty phenomenal. Something like cloud computing, and you look at the growth that's happened in cloud computing, and that's expected to happen over the next while. Google have just announced that they've cracked quantum computing as of last year. Big data, when you look at the amount of data we've got now, they reckon 80% of the data we see now has only really been generated in the last 2 to 3 years. The Internet of things are getting more and more connected. My photocopier outside the door here, it has all these automatic sensors built into it, so we know when the toner gets low, it gets automatically ordered. All this kind of stuff's happening, 3D printing, robotics, and then of course the mother and father of them all is AI, machine learning, and deep learning. Yeah. And if you've been following, and I'm sure you, Fergal, are across this, the developments that have been happening here is phenomenal, and all of these combined.
I think one of the things we see is just this, there's so much there for particularly non-technical people like leaders who are in CEOs, etc. Where do they start? It's just this, as you say, unbelievable wave of things that they know they need to do something about, but it's where do they start? How do they start?
Yeah. And that is, you're right, that's a really tough question. And to me, this is the thing, you've got to get, what are the foundations right? And this is really, when you look at all of the people and everybody's involved in transformations, digital transformations, any kind of transformation. What I see is people are losing the plot because they're focusing on not getting some of the foundations in place. And to me, that's really important. So, and we'll explore this a little bit more now as we get into it. The second thing I want to talk about is the human reality. What's the human reality that's out there in the world? And people are probably familiar with Gallup. They do all these engagement polls, every year or every couple of years. And the last one that I saw was, it had this statistic in it. 85% of people across the world were what they classified as not engaged. So not, jumping out of bed, wanting to go into work, wanting to add value, wanting to contribute. And when you think about that, it's just mind-blowing. When you think about it, the sort of people, everybody talks about, our people are our most important resource, but we're not getting anywhere near the potential out of people. And I know when I looked at this report, I even looked at the statistics, because they have a breakdown by country. And Australia was I think it was 86. So it's like, it's just phenomenal. Like, it's incredible. So that's the human reality. Now, I want to ask a question of people who's on the call. Is this something that we see happening, or is it something that you're observing? Because I'm looking at this, and I see this happening in a number of the clients that I work with. Everybody's trying to put in place this 21st century digital enabled organization, because this digital wave is coming, things are changing, we've got to be able to adapt, we've got to be able to move faster. But what is it being built on? In a lot of cases, it's been built on the 20th century management processes. And this is a sort of an industrial, mechanistic, hierarchical, top-down kind of approach of how we do stuff. And, carrot stick type reward systems that are in place. And then what is this even built on? In a lot of cases, it's been built on 19th century management principles. And what are those principles? So the two big ones that really jump out at me are specialization and command and control as a sort of a leadership style of how it works. And I see this playing out, and I'll be really interested. I think we've got a poll, Fergal, haven't we? Where we just get a sense from people around do they believe that this is happening? Is this something you see happening? I'll just stop sharing my screen for a second.
Yeah. So people are answering, yeah, okay. I'll give it another couple of seconds. We've had a few people starting to answer.
Really interested to see what people think.
Okay, just in the interest of time, I'm going to give it 3, 2, 1, and leave it at that.
So this, I just think this is really interesting.
Can you see those? Can people
yes,
see those results there?
Yeah, I can. Yeah. So here the results are, so 71% saying yes, yeah, 4% no, 25% not sure. This, when we look at this, and you want to close that poll just for a second?
Yeah.
I'll just call up my slides again. So the thing about it is, these are two very different philosophies and thinking models that sit under it. So if you look at the 21st century digital enabled organization, this is where all of the agile thinking and the lean thinking sits. And then when you look at that 20th century, 19th century, it is that whole sort of way of the thinking model and the processes and the leadership style that sits behind it is very, very different. And the problem is, if we get both of these things playing out together, then we can develop, or what I'm seeing happen in organization is we get poisonous gaps appearing, because what people are saying, what the senior leaders are saying, we need to empower people. We need to trust our people more. But then when you go down to, well, what's happening on the ground? What's the process that I'm following to do it? And it's this kind of micro process where you've got to, if you want to, like expense claims or something like that, oh, we trust our people, but hang on a second, you've got to fill in all these forms to be able to spend any money.
I'll give you an example. We had Stephen from just recently, doing some tenders for some public sector tenders for people who want to do technology implementations, and they stress that they want to adopt an agile approach. The whole tender process is actually geared towards traditional project management and traditional costing, etc. Absolute disconnect there.
Yeah, huge. Yeah,
that's an example.
Yeah, absolutely. And I look at this, Fergal, because this is where that you've hit on a really big one: the procurement, finance, the risk and compliance, and the thinking that sits around how we do things like risk and compliance. There is, and if people agree this is happening, to me, this is the one thing that sort of jumps off the page at me to say, there is a lot of unlearning that needs to happen in these areas. Because if we don't do that, we're going to have this kind of, these two things playing against each other in organizations. And like I said, it creates toxicity, it creates poisonous gaps, because what you say and what you do are very, very different. And
I guess you can have some people in the organization who are still operating in their own mindsets down in the bottom.
Yeah, absolutely. And the thing about it is, command and control, top-down hierarchies, like the military is a great example. They abandoned top-down hierarchical control after the Napoleonic Wars. But when you look at now in this today, in the way that we manage things, it's still seen as the norm. Like it's absolutely great. And this is the one thing that I've realized on the journey that I've been with my company. I realized we've got to move to this 21st century digital enabled, healthy, agile, lean, adaptive organizations. But sits behind that is a certain way of thinking and a certain way of doing things. Yeah. Now I want to do a little bit of an exercise with people, and we'll do a poll in a second where we'll ask the question. So, to me, this is, the mindset that people have, the beliefs you have around what do you believe is most important. And I want to just do a little bit of a test with people, and we'll just get a sense of the call of what people's beliefs are in this call around what they believe is most important. Now, I do this exercise in a lot of the workshops I do, just to try and get a sort of a handle on where we are at the moment. Now, the good news is there's no wrong answer here, okay? But when I do this exercise, I explain to people, listen, everything here is important, okay? There's nothing that's not important. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make it difficult for people, because you're going to have to choose between two different sort of ends of a spectrum. So the first one is, what do you think is most important? The customer comes first, or the employee comes first? Now, again, that's a tough one, isn't it? Yeah. Who is more important between? And obviously, both of those are extremely important. But if you had to make a call, would you be in zone 1 or would you be in zone 2?
And I'm going to throw a poll up shortly. So
yeah. So just think about it for a second. Yeah. So the second one I want to ask is cost and resource efficiency. So what's more important, cost and resource efficiency or flow efficiency? And what I mean by flow efficiency is how quickly and how fast can we deliver something to our customers? So if a customer has a need and then you deliver it, that's like the full flow through the organization. So when you think, what's your belief now around what you believe? Because they're both obviously very important. But what would be, if you to make a call, and this is the thing, your mindset, it needs to be binary. Is it this or that? You know, so would we be in zone 1 or zone 2? And then the last one I've got is, what's more important, processes and tools or people and interactions? So what is, and again, both of those are really important. So I think if we've got that, we'll call up that poll, Fergal.
Yeah. Just give me 1 second, just about to do it.
Be really interested to see what people think here. And like I said, there's no right or wrong answer here. I just want to get a sense of where people, if you're put on the line now, what do you think is most important?
People can see that. So we'll give it another 20 seconds or so. Okay, 3, 2, 1. Okay, and I will share the results, and hopefully people can see that.
Yeah, so that's really interesting. And again, you know, when you look at this, so in the first one had here customer 56%, employee 44. To me, I will be arguing that you know, and if the reason why, if we're on the left hand, if we're on zone 1, there's a very good reason people are on zone 1, and that's the way that sort of, you know, 20th century, 19th century model works. But what we want is, if we want to put that, you know, agile, lean, adaptive 21st century, then we've got to try and get everybody's mindset to be more over on the right-hand side. So like, let's just quickly go through them. Customer versus employee. Who finds the customer? Who looks after the customer? The employee. So I will be arguing that that is your true backbone. Absolutely, you're out of business if you haven't got a customer. Totally agree. But to me, who finds them? Who looks after them? When you look at the second one, and you can clearly see here that people, 89% are flow. Love it. That's absolutely, I would 100% agree. But when you look at the organizations you work for and you work in, is that true? Is that what you see happening? Because it's not what I see in a lot of organizations. Isn't it true that the systems are optimized for cost efficiency, resource efficiency? It's not optimized for flow. But I completely agree. If everybody had that mindset, that would have really big implications on how we get organized. How do we organize ourselves? How do we design work? How do we assign work? How do we fund things? How do we do things? So I totally agree with what people are saying here. And then obviously the same with the last slider here in terms of what people have. But again, yeah.
Of course, another aspect to throw on top of this, and I know you run this in workshops, Stephen, is you know, if you've got a leadership team that are divided between zone 1 and zone 2, obviously can cause difficulties.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've just a really big client I was working with. I did this exercise where I said, okay, you're the most senior leadership team. Let's see where everybody's mindset is. And to me, because this is the thing, whatever your beliefs are, they're dictating your behaviors or actions. So
Yeah.
again, you've got to make sure you get people on the right page. Now, there's a very good reason why people are on that left-hand side is because of the way that they've been trained and the typical management practices. But to
Yeah.
me, and this is one of the things that we've got to help try to shift. So let me just call my slides back up here again. Just one sec. So yeah. So now, you know, and again, when we think about it, if we have a certain mindset for very good reason that's sitting over here on that sort of zone one, that left-hand side, if we want to try and shift our mindset, how do we go about doing that? How do we shift it? If we have a certain belief, and I look at myself, you know, in the journey I've come on over ETM, I have radically shifted what my belief is around what's more important. Traditional project management, agile lean, now unlearning. If you want to do it, you can't talk your way to it. You've got to act your way to it. So everything starts with behavior. You've got to start doing things differently. And then if you start doing things differently, that will change your perspective of how you see things. And then when you see things differently, that then ultimately will impact your mindset, which then again will affect your behavior and how you behave. But this is really important. People, everything starts with behavior. You cannot talk your way to it. You've got to start doing things differently. And like I explained before, this is why, you know, if you want to be able to shift in this cycle of unlearning, we've got to start doing things, experimenting with our behavior, and then seeing and learning, reflecting and learning whether or not we're achieving it. So really important. Yeah. Now, you know, we're on this webinar, just conscious of time here. Hopefully, you know, I would be really super impressed, because to me, you're wasting your time unless you go and try and do something as a result of what we're doing. So what I would love for people to do on this session is to go away and think about something that you might need to unlearn, a challenge that you have. Some kind of, you know, like I said, ask those questions. Where am I not achieving the outcomes I want? What am I not achieving my expectations? And then think about trying to design a small little behavior experiment for yourself. So when we do an experiment, what you do is you start with a hypothesis. So what you try and do is, well, okay, I'm going to try and identify some small new behavior or action that I'm going to do. And then if I do this, what do I think is going to happen? So that's why it's very important. You got to start with an experiment. So your hypothesis, here's what I'm going to do. Here's what I think is going to happen. And then when you do, say, okay, let's go and do it. Perform that behavior. And then when you perform the behavior, then you've got to obviously take that time to reflect and say, well, did what I thought was going to happen, did it happen? And if it did happen, okay, great. Maybe I'll try and do more of it. Or if it didn't, then, you know, try and think about, well, it didn't happen, so maybe there's something else I need to try. So I really would love people to go away from this session and commit to trying to do a little behavior experiment for ourselves. And like you were saying, Fergal, how do you start doing on this journey? You start with doing something really small. And to me, this is, if I'm a senior leader, like that example you said, you know, how you run meetings, how you interact with your team. Try and do something different. And again, do something that makes you feel uncomfortable. Because if you're in your comfort zone, you're not going to be learning. So you've got to try something different. So this is really, you know, we've got to try and, you know, and hopefully this is, you know, I want this to be
interesting. We've given a couple of examples. You might give a few more, Stephen, if you've got them that people can try. But I'm interested in asking the audience if there's anything they're going to try as a result of this, or any small experiments that they've had in mind that, you know, maybe we've prompted them to go away and try for themselves.
Yeah, well, like I think of, like, you know, like I think from a work point of view, and I'm just doing this session with you, Fergal. I've got a little experiments I'm doing, like I was saying, with the pausing for what I'm trying to do and how I'm trying to run this kind of session at home with my kids. I'm trying to, you know, get my son to go out and do some more stuff with myself. He's, like I'm sure with all our kids, stuck on technology. I'm experimenting with how I react with him or behave with him to try and get him to do stuff. Like I did one the other day where, you know, he's into Pokemon Go, and you know, I said, okay, we'll go out. He didn't want to come out with me for to do some, I was doing a message. And I said, okay, you can use my phone on the way there. And then that got him into the car. And then once we got there, he had to switch it off. So again, just trying to experiment. I want to achieve certain outcomes. So let's start experimenting. Yeah.
Just a question around this experiment, and should the experiment be measurable against an outcome that we can measure and reflect on? So how do you know when an experiment has been successful?
Yeah, absolutely. Like to me, and this is where when we go into more workshop, it's all about making sure that you're clear about that outcome, Fergal. And you've got to have something that you define what success is. And you make sure that you have something that's measurable. This was just a very simple one to try and get people into that process of just starting to do something.
I've probably tried to make you keep this as simple as possible in terms of...
But no, you're absolutely right. Yeah, you've got to have, what is success, and make sure you define it clearly for yourselves. Yeah. Here's some examples of, you know, companies that I think are really out there, you know, actively, you know, trying to build unlearning into their DNA. You know, we were talking, myself and Fergal, at the start about Atlassian and that quote that Fergal has. I just think Atlassian are such a great example. When my collaborator Barry wrote his book, and he was coming to Australia, we were organizing some executive breakfast events off the back of the book. And I remember the minute we planned the event in Sydney, I reached out to my good friend in Atlassian, Dom Price. And I said, oh, Dom, we're running this breakfast on Unlearning. Would you be interested in coming? And he came back as quick as anything. He said, yeah, absolutely, Steve. And he said, can I invite some people? And I said, yeah, no problem. He basically invited the whole executive leadership team for Atlassian to our Sydney event. Now, here's a company that I'm sure everybody on the call, if you're familiar with them, they are like, I just put them up on a pedestal. I think you'll struggle to find a better organization in terms of, you know, where, you know, the kind of thinking that they have. And here was their senior leadership team, even saying now, because everybody reckons they're like way out there in front of everybody, but they were still thinking about, what do we need to unlearn? What do we need? What are those things that we now, if we want to stay at the top of the game, what do we need to unlearn? The other good one is Amazon. You know, Jeff Bezos, you know, he built a whole building and he called the building Day One. Day one. So everybody comes to that building every day. You're sort of, let's just not be complacent. Let's think about, is there anything we need to unlearn? Has something become obsolete? And to me, this is, you know, it's just when you look at what we've been talking about in the past, the way things are changing, you know, things are constantly changing and they will constantly keep changing. So if we don't sort of start doing this more regularly, systematically, then to me, the danger, you know, of us, you know, staying relevant, I think is there's a big danger. I love this. This is a mantra that came from Barry's book. And I just think, and with all of my clients, you know, think big. So be bold, think big for where you want to go. Start small. So again, always starting with something that's so small that you feel safe to be able to do. So safe from a psychological point of view, people, you know, psychologically safe, but not only psychologically safe, economically safe, you know, financially safe. And start small and then learn fast. And this is how we step into uncertainty. This is how we deal with uncertainty. We've got to step forward into it, but we do things that are small. And then that helps us to learn.
From a technology perspective, I mean, prototyping is something we do all the time, and we highly recommend it because, it allows you to do something small. It allows you to fail. Yeah. And you just learn along the way. Yeah, absolutely. You know, here, I've read a great book just over the Christmas, actually, and it was a book called The One Thing. And basically, on this book, the guy said, like I always use, or I have in the past, always use Pareto's Law. What's the really important stuff that you got to focus on? What's the critical 20%? This is like Pareto's Law on steroids, because what he says is success is all about trying to line up a series of dominoes. And your job is to try and say, well, at this moment in time, what's the one thing that's the most important that I should focus on now that's going to make everything else easier?
And then, so like you say, it's all very overwhelming when you look at what we need to do, but then just pull it back and say, well, what's the first small thing that we need to do that's going to help us to be able to move forward into the future? What's that little building block that will help us? And to me, that's what, you know, working with my clients, it's trying to figure out, well, what's the most important little building block that's going to help you at whatever, you know, you are at this point in time. You know, just...
Can you play that video, Stephen?
Oh, sorry, I took it out and I was conscious of time here, Fergal.
Okay.
We're running out of time here.
The video is great. You hit the little domino and it eventually goes down the line and knocks over this absolutely massive domino.
Yeah, and that's the thing about it. You build up momentum, and it's all about trying to line that up. Yeah. So just, yeah. Sorry, Fergal.
Sorry, I'm just mindful just the time, so I'll let you do
it. Yeah, that's always just conscious of the time.
4 or 5 minutes for questions. That's okay.
Yeah. So just to wrap it up, so in the past, you know, knowledge and skills lasted for, you know, or have lasted for a long time. Whereas now, it's not saying they're out of date, but the danger is that we've got to be very, very careful. And you look at the kind of world we're living in now, what's the reality of the world that we're living in now? You know, what the technology reality, the human reality, and when you look at, you know, this kind of thing that's playing out between these old 20th century, 19th century, a lot of reason why that human reality is so bad is because we've got this kind of situation sort of playing out. And to me, this is why I just so strongly believe this is why unlearning and relearning now is such a key step. You know, if we want to continue to stay relevant into the future, it's got to be, I see it as this foundation. And, you know, at the start of the presentation, I started with that opening question, you know, what's a leader's biggest limiting factor? You know, it's their ability to unlearn the past. And I just feel like, and again, go back to that picture of the domino. I feel like if you have everybody open and willing to unlearn and has that as a foundation in your organization, then I just think this is one of the really important foundations we've got to put in place.
Right. So look, Stephen, I'm just going to open it up for questions. If people have any questions, please start typing them into the chat box and we'll, or the Q&A box, either or really, and I'll pick them up and we'll put them to Stephen. We've given people, you know, I guess what we wanted to achieve as Symphony 3 here was to just get people thinking and let them go away and digest what you've talked about today. But for those who do want to take it a bit further, I guess here's your chance for a plug, Stephen. How do people engage you? How do you work? You know, how do you take this to the next level in a business? Yeah, no, thanks for it. Well, we've developed now a sort of what we think is a pretty innovative kind of model, and obviously we've had to adapt to the world. So we've developed this kind of virtual thing. Unlearning is not something you can go to a workshop and expect it's going to happen. It's something you've got to build that stickiness into what you're doing. So we've developed this kind of 5-week program. So if anybody's interested, more than happy to chat with that. But, you know, to me, this, you know, yeah, so more than happy. You can just reach out to me. I think you've got my details here. Or, the book is Unlearn. It's available on Amazon, etc. as well. Well worth the read, I think, for people. I'm going to ask you a question to start off, given we're working in the, you know, the I guess, agile sphere in terms of technology. Given your 3 levels, and you've got, you know, your 21st century thinking that we want to have, which is agile, and yet looking at centuries old practices. Can agile actually work in today's firms? Well, again, this is like, that's such a question. It's a big, like that word agile, like to me, it's just, it's a really big word. And if, you know, we've got, I don't know how many people we've got on the call here, but if we lined everybody up and we said, what does it mean to you? It's a pretty big, like, to me, we've got no choice. When I boil down to agile thinking and lean thinking, both of them, what are they all about? They're all about trying to give you a way of thinking and a way of working that helps you to cope in a fast changing and a dynamic world, and in a way that helps you to get the best out of your people. That to me is the essence of what it's all about. So now that, and to me, that's why it's a no-brainer for me, absolute no-brainer, that everybody, whoever you are on the call, you've got to go down this path. Now, the thing is, a lot of times people see, and it comes from software delivery, agile, there's different ways of doing work. And I use it like a spectrum, fit for purpose approach. One end of a spectrum is more that traditional project delivery, plan-driven approaches. And if you've got a certain scenario, that makes sense.
But if you're doing something where there's a huge amount of uncertainty, lots of unknowns, then it all makes sense to work in an incremental, iterative, adaptive approach. But the mindset that needs to span needs to be the same. Because if we can't get people to have the same kind of thinking, we're just going to have this conflict playing out in organization because people are coming with that same different mental models. Yeah.
Now we've just hit 1 o'clock, so people can head off if they have to. I'm going to keep going. We've some more questions just for those that need to leave. Thank you for taking part and listening. We will make the slides, I'm sure, Stephen, and this recording available.
Sure.
I'll keep running along the questions. I've got one here from James. What are the other trigger questions for the need to unlearn? What kind of questions can we ask ourselves to start this unlearning process?
Yeah, no, great question. Like, to me, the big ones are, where am I not achieving my expectations? Where am I not achieving the outcomes I'm after? Where are things I'm avoiding? And I think that's a really big one as well. If I'm avoiding something, it means that there's something that I'm not happy that I can actually do. They're probably the big ones that sort of come to mind. But it's just, what people don't realize is that, our mindset is our biggest weapon to help us to adapt. When you look at organizations, if they want to adapt to the world, they bring out new products, they evolve their products, new features, all that kind of stuff. Whereas as humans, the way we adapt, or the way we need to adapt, is our mindset and our behaviors are the biggest weapons we've got. And to me, a lot of times we just think of it's fixed. Once you've got it in there, oh, this is the way it always works. Well, I'm sorry. A lot of times now, and you can see with COVID, those kind of beliefs that we've had that have been shattered. And I would ask the question to people, what other beliefs are you hanging on to that are actually, not really relevant anymore? Yeah.
A question here. How can we introduce this concept, this is from Gary, this concept to people, so the unlearning concept, without overwhelming them?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think, to me, this is what I do with my clients. I think the first step is trying to, and I do this with senior leaders, is because trying to get them to be open to the idea of unlearning. And then get them to see that, that whole cycle of unlearning is, it's not saying what you know is wrong, but it may be. We've got to be careful and be open to it. And then the trouble is that I know for a fact that there's a lot of stuff that needs to be reshifted. But just first step, just be open to the idea of unlearning and this concept of unlearning. That's the first step, I believe. Yeah.
Now, another question here from Paul. How important is it to have some sort of guide to unlearning, or principles to guide that deconstruction and rebuilding of beliefs? I'm thinking it could be easy to spiral, or for people to get lost in unlearning.
Yeah, it's again a really good question. This is, what I've and I'm going on a journey myself, and I've sort of collaborated, or I'm collaborating with people who I think are like absolute leaders in this field. Barry O'Reilly's one. There's another great guy in the UK called John Seddon, who's been doing this for years. And it's all about how do we go about helping people to shift those mental models. And everybody's situation, everybody's context is different. So you've got to, to me, it's a lot of it is you've got to get people to see things for themselves. You can't sit them in a room and tell them and start talking about, you've got to get them to, like I talk about, like the way I do this is getting senior leaders to sort of stand in the shoes of their customers and then get them to look in at how they're delivering value to their customers. What's the what and why of performance? And how are things working? What controls are we using? Are those controls working? Are they hurting performance, or are they helping performance? And it's only by getting people to see things for themselves, then once you see something, you can't unsee it. And again, it's all about priorities. What are the most important? Think about in your own context, what are the dominoes based on where we are now in our own organization? And then just, this is the challenge, lining up what are those important dominoes that I've got to try and do? Because you're absolutely right. I can see, when you look at what needs to happen, it's pretty important. Whereas myself and a really great guy, Dr. Dowling, are just starting a series of articles which are targeted at the C-suite, the senior executives, to help them sort of what are those dominoes to try and help. Yeah.
if you're hiring people and you want to get this unlearning philosophy into your business, and I know you're not a recruitment or a HR person necessarily, but what kind of characteristics should people be looking for if they're making new hires or bringing people into their organization?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think, you know, the characteristics you want, like the first one that comes immediately to mind is people who are curious. People who are curious, you know, and want to sort of discover things. Like curiosity is a really important one that you've got to get. You know, commitment. You know, a lot of times, you know, you've got to own things yourself and be willing to take ownership for stuff. You know, you're going to be doing a lot of things that will push you outside your comfort zone. So if you want to be unlearning, you're going to be walking away from something that you're probably crash hot at and then starting new. So you're finding people who are, you know, going to be comfortable with getting uncomfortable. And that's really what you want. But they've got this hunger to learn, you know, to be able to sort of find new, better ways, you know, work and sort of discover it. But they're the big ones that would sort of come to mind. Yeah, great question.
Another one I've got. So, you know, we talked about the Zen master emptying his teacup, but you probably want to empty the teacup totally. There's things we learn along the way that are obviously vitally important. And to me, I guess the challenge, if I'm thinking about unlearning and even in our own organization, what are the practices that we discard and what are the practices that we keep in place? But I'm asking you directly.
But you've got to. This is one thing. To me, if everybody's open to this idea of unlearning, then it's only by everybody starting off by opening it. Then you start having those robust, honest conversations in your own context to start talking about, well, what are those things that are still working? Let's keep them. Let's make sure we're not losing them. What's the new things? But it's like a continuous thing, because what's worked in the past, because if something changes in your reality, then you've got to be constantly put your finger on the pulse here, because it may change in the future. But it's all about, and this is what agile sort of ways of working are all about, collaborating as a team, as an organization, with your external, you know, partners. And it's all about having these constant conversations, helping, you know, to keep moving forward in the right direction. So good question, Fergal. Yeah.
Any final questions there? Just throw them in. I think we've gone through, have picked up most of them. If I've missed any, please remind me in the chat box. Look, if they don't come through, Stephen, I just want to say thank you very much. Great to get an introduction to unlearning. You've given us a great overview and some good ideas and some good basic concepts. You know, that cycle of unlearning, I think, is something that we can take away with us.
Yeah.
I'd like to thank, on behalf of everybody, thank you for giving up your time and talking to us. And yeah, people can contact Stephen. We'll make the slides available and Stephen's contact details. Just in terms of people who are on the call, interested, and we'll put a survey out later, but if there's other topics that you think are important in the context of digital transformation, we'd be interested in having other experts like Stephen come along. So please let us know, and we'll try and run these sessions a bit more regularly for people. But I guess in summation, thank you very much, Stephen. Appreciate you giving us time, and hopefully you enjoyed it as
it's been great. Thanks, Fergal. Really enjoyed it. Thanks for the opportunity. Yeah.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks.